Welcome to Spirit, Purpose, and Energy. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host, and thank you for downloading today's episode. We're going to talk about the fountain of youth in your body. But before we get to that, I do want to make a few announcements. We are heading to the end of the month here, and just want to say it's the last chance for you to join the 30-day manifestation challenge. It is free. Go to jjflazanes.com/30-day, 30-day. And you can register, even though I wanted you to be registered by yesterday. I will allow it that today, February 26th, you are able to also join, get in the Facebook quickly, and review all the videos to successfully start our 30-day manifestation challenge on March 1st. I also want to announce that there are still a few spaces left on the Dolphin and Whale Wisdom Retreat that I'm doing with Ann Gordon. So if you're interested in that, please email me through the website or contact me through Instagram or Facebook and let me know that you're interested in coming with us on that. It's a 5 or 6 day actual event, but it's 7 days with travel to Panama to be and swim with the wild dolphins and whales. And for those of you that haven't heard Anne's show, Anne does some channeling and guided visualization and meditations guided by the dolphins and the whales. And I'm going to be adding in some exercise, some mindful movement. We're going to talk about some food things. We're going to talk about spiritual things, law of attraction things. We're talk about play, and we're going to have a really good time. So for anyone who's interested, there are still spaces left. So please contact me so we can get you on the boat. There's only 12 of us who are able to fit, and I would love to have the absolute right people who cannot wait to be in contact with these amazing magical creatures that have a lot to teach us. So I think that's it for the announcements. I'm going to introduce to you Erin Burch. Erin Burch is the founder of the Burch Method, the pre-eminent approach to reversing pain and aging. Erin has been in the health and wellness field for nearly 40 years, beginning with her training as a physical therapist and 4 years in immersive yoga study. This gave her the framework she needed to reverse a crippling situation of her own when nothing else helped. She has worked with top actors, rock musicians, professional athletes, and executives, putting bodies back together and sharing her powerful message that aging doesn't have to mean pain, disability, a gnarled body, and a shrinking world. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you because you also being in the health profession and wellness as I am, it's always nice for me to meet people and work with people that do different things and complement each other's services. And I love coming at wellness and health from multiple different angles, especially when they're integrated. And for me, I'm all about that mind, body, soul approach. And I know your Fountain of Youth is also an integrated approach. And so before we get into what your 3-prong approach is for that, why don't you tell us your background story, that personal story that even got you here?
Okay. Well, I started off in physical therapy, so I was, Patty PT for a little while, and then I quickly kind of got booted out of the profession by way of a really nasty experience, my first experience in physical therapy, and sort of tumbled out of that, landed in a yoga ashram for 4 years, which really shifted my whole holistic health paradigm. And this is way back, this is in the 80s. So this is back when yoga was still a 4-letter word and not on every street corner. So with that as a basis, when I got into a car accident when I was pregnant a couple of years later, I wasn't sure what was going on exactly because my body had developed an abdominal abscess from that car accident. And I was in a ridiculous amount of pain, but also in a very, very deep denial that anything was wrong because I was wanting a home birth for my daughter and, really wanting things to go well. So it wasn't, I actually let that abdominal abscess grow for about 2 months, finally had the surgery, which probably saved my life. And then a year later, I had another surgery, which also was a life-saving surgery. So between those 2 surgeries and I had my daughter and I had the hot tub home birth with her and it was amazing. I thought everything was going to go back to normal. But after those surgeries, what happened was the scar tissue had invaded my whole pelvic area, my hips, my lower back, and started to corkscrew my pelvis about 30 degrees offline, which is a huge amount of distortion and not sustainable. I was 35 at the time, and I started to actually feel old in my body. And I was limping, I had pain, I had stiffness. Doing yoga actually caused internal ripping, which is never a good thing to feel. And when that happened, I realized the depth of my problem, because your body doesn't rip unless there's no other choice. And I had run out of grace, which we all have, and really it made me realize I was in a really bad situation. And of course, I went to find other people who could help or fix this. But I I started to spiral down, and nobody was helping. Nothing was helping. And so I started to feel really, really old and really hopeless, until I had one of those, Scarlett O'Hara, as God is my witness moments, because I was looking into a future where I was probably going to be crippled within 5 years. I wouldn't have been able to walk. And because moving was getting harder and harder, and just walking across the floor was a hard thing. Getting into the car, I had to lift my leg, like nothing was working. And I felt scotch taped and safety pinned together. And then I had to figure this out myself, because there was no way I was going to live that life. And I had to come up with something.
So how long had you had the scar tissue? Like, how long was it building up and sort of taking hold?
It was about 2 years. I was kind of blithely going through life, going back into motherhood, going back to work, and thinking my body was going to go back to normal, but it didn't at all.
And you, as a physical therapist, did they give you physical therapy or exercises or something to do after each of those surgeries that might have prevented it? Or did you do exercises and it still happened anyway?
Well, I was doing yoga, and it happened anyway. I was actually doing yoga when I felt that internal ripping. Like, instead of that delicious stretching sensation that you anticipate, I actually felt like something was ripping inside, and that was so really scary.
Okay. And so continue on from when you thought you needed to do something about this. Like, when was that turning point for you?
It was about when I was 35, because 35 or 36, and I was, like I said, watching my body spiral out of control and get me into a place where I was old. And if that had happened when I was 80, I wouldn't have questioned it. I just would have thought, well, that's what happens, But it happened at 35, and I knew how abnormal that was. And putting the stake in the ground, JJ, was like really the turning point for me. That, as God is my witness moments, like, I didn't know how, and I wasn't even sure I was capable of it, but I was definitely going to do that, or pretty much or die trying, because it was so abhorrent to me to look into the future and see that outcome.
So how did you develop your method? What was the first thing that happened that led you to how to heal this?
The first thing that happened was somebody said to me that you can't think a thought and feel a sensation at exactly the same time. And when I heard that, I thought, can that be true? Like, I kind of tested it out, and I realized that I could sort of do one and sort of do the other. Or I could go back and forth really quickly, but I couldn't actually be in the realm of sensation and be in my thinking mind, and I couldn't be in my thinking mind and be in the realm of sensation. And why that was really a turning point for me was because, well, first of all, there are times when it was really nice to have a vacation from my mind, my thinking mind that sometimes was kind of toxic. So it was nice to be able to move away from that as an experience. And then what was really the bonus was that I had predictable and repeatable access to my body where the problem actually was. And I started to mine my body for information and feedback about this tangle of scar tissue that was imprisoning my body.
And what led you to the first, I know, like I said, you have 3 different three-pronged approach? What led you to that first approach?
Well,
That
that
first
was,
piece.
yeah. So the three-pronged approach, the three things that I work with people with is alignment, attunement, and assembly. And when I started, JJ, the only thing that I had was the attunement. And that was going into my body, having repeatable and predictable access to my body and starting to learn the language of sensation. And most of us have been in our bodies. Well, all of us have been in our bodies all of our lives, but most of us only have what I would describe as like a phrase book for handy things. Like if you go to a different culture and you're trying to get a meal, or you're trying to go to find a restroom, or you're trying to do something like that, you have a phrase book for those kind of things. And most people in their bodies have a phrase book for things. We know what it's like to be hungry or tired or thirsty or, sick or any of those things. So that's sort of our phrase book. But most of us don't actually know the finer points or the nuances of sensation and what they actually mean and how to make that work for them. And so that's what I teach people to do, is to be fluent in the language of sensation so that they can negotiate the finer points of any problem that they have. Because we end up sort of painting ourselves into the same kind of corners all the time based on our habits of movement and our emotional states and those kind of things.
I want to go deeper into attunement because that's where we are right now, right? We're with
Yeah.
attunement. And for me, when I heard you talk about doing yoga after your surgeries, see, for me, and I'd love to debate this if there is a debate, or agree if we can agree, or disagree if we need to disagree. But for me, there's a neurological component to all movement. Obviously, there's an action potential. Your body can't move without your brain telling a muscle to contract. And so for me, that neurological connection to exercise is actually how I also help people rehab. And so it almost sounds like I want to see if it's the same or how they're slightly different, because I also hear you're talking about emotions. And for me, not the neurological connection of your brain to your muscle. So for me, yoga doesn't do that. Yoga doesn't do that for anybody, because you're hitting a pose. You're not actually generating the connection of the tissue from, let's say, wherever a muscle contracts. There are two parts to any contraction. There's the insertion and the origin. So for me, when I'm teaching someone motion and how to train that neurological component, I'm asking them to visualize and connect with, from a sensation point of view,
Mm-hmm.
where's point A and where's point B, very simply. Like where's the starting part, where are we pulling from and where are we pulling to, which helps with that sensation of them feeling their muscle to be more connected to it for that reason. Now that's a surface level skeletal muscle kind of thing, which most exercise does not do because it's very specific, although I feel like it's needed for all rehab, more so than just generalized, let's do some movement patterns. But I also heard you say, and I would not say that what I'm talking about would translate to also the emotional side, but then there's that emotional sensation of, where do I hold tension? When I feel something, where does it sit in my body? How does it feel? Is it tight? Is it a pit? Is it a flutter? So those two pieces for me, when I hear you say attunement, I go physical and then I go emotional. How are they the same or are they different for you?
There's a lot that you just said. First of all, your training, and my physical therapy training and my personal training would say that that movement happens from muscles. Yeah, is that what you said? I'm
Movement of
clarifying.
muscles. Movement can't happen in muscles unless the nervous system causes that contraction. So it has to start in the brain
Right.
first. And some of it's going to be not focused, because obviously you move every day without thinking about it. So there's some of these motor patterns that we just have, but in terms of activating new tissue or repairing damaged tissue or connecting to your body in a different way, in a more mindful way, that would be that the mind still needs to be involved to connect to the muscle to involve those new fibers.
Right, but it's not the same as the thinking mind. It's more the awareness mind.
What's not okay? Let's explain the difference between that, the thinking mind versus the awareness
Yeah,
mind.
so the thinking mind is sort of the monkey mind. It's the one that sort of generates thoughts almost all the time.
Okay, so you're subconscious. So can we say
Well,
subconscious?
it's your thinking mind that which generates thoughts. So like I'm sitting here and I'm saying, oh, my table's a mess, or I'm trying to think of what I'm going to say, or I'm kind of responding to what you're what you've been saying, or, that's all thought stuff. But when I went, so going into my body required presence kind of mind, which is a different quality than thinking mind. And it's that which is sentient, and that which witnesses. And so when you have to have some quality of mind, it's true, when you go into the body, but it's definitely more like, it's not a it's the stillness of an observer or a witness.
From a movement standpoint or from a noticing thing standpoint?
Um, well, for me, it actually ended up to be both. So, I mean, so I didn't, in my own rehab of myself, I did a lot of exploration of movement. So I wasn't doing a prescription kind of a thing like, you were describing yoga. I was doing the yoga of witnessing, or the yoga of awareness, and presencing that in my body. And it wasn't so much an emotional piece, it was really based in sensation. And even though those two things probably can't be pulled apart completely, I was focused on not the somatic, as most people describe somatic work, is more like the emotional quality. It was more like the physical quality. And learning the landscape and learning the language was what I needed to do to actually get inside and start to unravel, like necklaces in a jewelry box, unravel this scar tissue and start to redefine it.
Can we separate them into two pieces to make one, or are you classifying everything under one umbrella for the noticing? Because I'm sitting here going through my body, and they're connected. I'm not trying to make them disconnected from each other, but one is sort of those, like you said, that observer mind, that just however your body feels in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
versus the, if I'm moving, how am I thinking about that? If I'm sitting and things, and I'm feeling things and I'm noticing things, if I'm sitting and I'm having an emotion and noticing things, or if I'm walking around and I'm noticing things, is it all for you classified under one thing, and it's all sort of a state of consciousness that we're in? Or can it be applied a little differently, versus if you are, let's say, exercising, or if you're having an emotion, or if you're just meditating? Are there any levels to it?
Interesting. I don't know that I've thought about it that way, but when I'm exercising and I'm in a class, for example, my attention's really going to be split between what I'm noticing in my body and following the map of the exercise class. Whether it's spin, or whether it's yoga, or whether it's a cardio class, or whatever it is, my attention's going to be split. But if I'm I've used motion, it challenges us differently than stillness, for sure. So when I've been, or slower motion, which is why Feldenkrais kind of works, is because you slow everything down and you put it under a magnifying glass and you say, okay, like, what's actually going on? What can I notice right here, right now, when it's really slowed down? When you speed things up, it's definitely more challenging. So I don't know. I think the noticing part, takes cultivation.
So then the attunement for you is more of that mindful noticing, whether it be in movement or not.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
there's not really I hate to say, there's not really a scientific, like, because I can explain neurological connection for the muscle in a scientific way, and we can explain it in a behavioral science way for the somatic, like you were talking about. But this sort of this is more like a mindfulness, consciousness connection on all levels at all times, but is a little bit more focused when you're still, and has a little more challenge, if you will, when you're moving. Does that sound
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the things that I learned is that it's because our consciousness is what it is, consciousness, that when you steep it into a problem in your body, and you actually in the substrate of the matrix of whatever you're feeling, um, you can't do that over an extended period of time and not learn something. Your body and your consciousness are working together to create more enlightenment, if you will.
Okay. And how do you feel, like, what steps did you take to get attuned? or how do you help others get attuned? And do you, before you even answer that question, because I want to link this too, because I know you do this work. Do you work with people in person? Do you work with people in groups? Do you work with people over internet, Skype or FaceTime or phone? How do you work with people?
Uh, I work best with people in person, and I also have worked in groups, and I've also worked over Zoom, for example, because especially once I've worked with somebody, I do VIP days, which is 6 hours with me, which we do a lot of really cool stuff. And then I follow up with them on Zoom, and then I can actually feel what's going on in their body after I've had experience, and we're speaking the same language, like we're on the same page with what I'm expecting or wanting them to follow through with. Um, and I can tell when they're getting it, and I can tell when they're not getting it, and I can make recommendations based on that. Attunement for me, I spent a lot of time in my body, and when I did that, I spent 25 years, tens of thousands of hours. So it puts me into that place of, kind of knowing things that most people don't know because I haven't had that experience. And therefore, I sort of learned the design, at least to a certain extent. And so when I teach people their attunement, I teach them about their design. In other words, if the shoulder is a ball and socket, then what a ball loves to do more than anything else is roll. And where people get into problems with their shoulder joint is when the ball of the shoulder isn't actually moving anymore because of tension or because of injury or because of compensation from injury. Any of those things will compromise the ball moving. And when the ball is moving, the joint is super happy. And I've actually been keeping a couple of my clients from shoulder surgery who've had rotator cuff tears because they know the alignment, they understand the design of their body, and they work within that.
Great. So attunement that's the first of the three, right? And so what would be the next one that you focused on to start your healing and that you healed yourself and help others?
Yeah, so it all goes back to the design and alignment. A lot of people will, nod. They understand what alignment is. But I've got a really specific way of describing alignment. Every single structure in the body has what I call a happy place. It's a place that's really designated just for that structure. And then it's got a happy dance in that structure has a little bit of range of motion or slide or glide or some mobility, maybe it's intestinal motility. There's something that structure does that enhances the ability for the body to do what it does. And then it has happy relationships or specific connections that that makes this whole entity hum, basically. And so when every structure is in its happy place and doing its happy dance and in its happy relationships, then there's no pain, there's no problems in the body, and there's no issues because the design is being honored. And so it's kind of like when I say the word clockworks, and in this digital society that might be kind of outdated, but you can sort of imagine gears and levers and things interacting in a very specific way. And if something goes a little wonky in the clockworks, the whole mechanism shuts down. Now, like I mentioned before, our body has grace in it. It has built in, so it's not so detrimental. I mean, it's not so detrimental immediately and to the fact that things shut down. It's that things go offline, and then there is always a cost to that. And so we don't necessarily know it if we're not paying attention in the attunement phase. And so we allow things to get to a point of pain and breakdown before we do anything about it. And that's when alignment's really compromised.
I really love that description of the happy place because from the structural side, that's much more eloquent and feminine. Actually, I look at it more from the structural side of biomechanics and how every joint is built perfectly in your body to absorb force or not, and look at exercise in the way of so many people are doing exercises and putting force on joints in positions that they're not supposed to be absorbing force, which is why there's injury and
right.
for a lot of people in exercise. So I also have a very strong affinity. That's why my company is called Invisible Fitness, because 10 years ago, 12 years ago. How long have I been here? 18. Okay. My company's been around for 15 or 16 years. And in the initial thought of the brand was actually because, in my early 20s, I cared more about saving your joints while like prolonging them, not saving them, but keeping them intact by using what you're talking about, this alignment idea, and that the body, like, honor the body's structure, how it's built. And so when you're thinking about doing exercise, that's the same thing, and be responsible with some of the movements and the forces that we're putting on our bodies, and to rotate the tires, so to speak, to make sure the wear and tear patterns are even and not one thing over over time. And I got super excited about that science in my early 20s. And that was a horrible sell for people. Nobody cared about their joints. Nobody cares until they're injured, right? Like,
Yeah,
they expect me to be selling weight loss. And I'm like,
Truly.
okay, but I can take you on this program and you'll lose weight, wreck your joints, or I can take you over here on this program and you'll still lose weight and you'll build muscle and you'll have a metabolism and you will save points.
Well, so hopefully, there is starting to be a value in sustainability. It's just beginning, but people are starting to, like, that word is actually starting to be in the lexicon, not just in terms of bodies, but in terms of the planet. Like, sustainability as a concept is starting to grab hold a little bit. So yes, I agree with you. I mean, I couldn't be in more agreement with you about the sustainability of, like, because here's the thing, JJ. I mean, I've worked in nursing homes as a physical therapist. I've worked in hospitals, and when people outlive their body, it's freaking heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and they don't have to do that. And when one thing starts to break down, it's connected to all the rest of the system, and other things start to break down. And then if you're not actually, addressing those things, then you find yourself in situations like that. And that's just my stand, is to keep people out of situations like that. But of course, even though they didn't plan on being in nursing homes or hospitals at the end of life, they didn't plan not to. And that's what you're talking about, and that's what I'm talking about. It's like, how do we get people so that they care about the longevity and the sustainability of their bodies? Because our life projections are into the hundreds now. And most people that I see in their 50s are not going to comfortably make it.
Oh, and my new love and I just joined the gym, and it's the only reason, and that's like weird for me. Anyone that knows me knows I don't go to gyms. I can't go to gyms. It's very hard for me to go to the gym because I can't, right? Because I can't look around at bad things and
I
not,
know.
and it's like,
Blinders.
I have
I
to
know.
go, why am I getting upset about this? Is it an ego thing? And it's really not. Like, I think I'm speaking up for their joints. Like, I
Yes.
see someone do some stupid exercise that they don't have any clue, no connection, no mindfulness, no plan, no knowledge. And it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because I know your joints are going to pay for it, and you're going to have a shoulder injury, and then you're not going to be able to do that exercise anymore. And to
Right.
me, so it infuriates me about the lack of understanding of the sciences involved in our bodies and in the movement, and how everyone thinks that exercise, everyone should just know, just take a class, take any class, just do a program, buy a book, buy a
Right.
DVD. And I'm like, no, this is a complex combination of so many sciences. What makes you think you understand any of it? But anyway, as I digress, because the
I
alignment
love it.
piece,
I love it. I love your passion because it matches mine. When I go to the gym, I'm the same thing. I just got to look, I got to look down. I just can't, I can't. Even a yoga class, like how people are moving, we don't know how to move. Like, that's very clear to me. And it's not our fault. We didn't come with a manual. Like, I get that. And like, there is, like, when people take the responsibility, when my clients learn their design and they work within it, like, if you're not working with your design, you're working against it. Right?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and it's amazing because and maybe like me, like you, I've been fine tuning my message as time goes on. And not that working with people one-on-one is something I'm going to be doing much longer, but was interviewed on a radio show, and the physician, she's actually a psychologist who has like 5 injuries. She asked me, well, JJ, what about for the people that don't have a personal trainer or don't have this knowledge? And I said, Dr. Jane, why wouldn't you hire somebody? If you have 5 injuries, why not? And she went, oh, well, that makes sense. And of course, now she's my client. But it's and people not understanding that hiring someone like you or me is an investment into their education. It's not someone to babysit me or fix me and then let me go. It's an investment in the education of your body.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new level that, I mean, I don't babysit, and I know you don't babysit.
I don't.
There's very specific information that then gets passed down to the client who invests in their body, to then after that you have that knowledge forever, whether you continue working with us or not. I trust half of my clients to train people over half the trainers I see, because the
Mm-hmm.
ones who've been with me for years get it.
They
And
get it.
right,
Mm.
so anyway, so I think we are moving into that phase where, like you said, sustainability and people understanding a little bit more, and hopefully through the education that we're both providing, people are getting a little bit more hip to the fact that, this is a bunch of sciences and I don't know. And the average trainer or physical therapist or doctor has no clue
Right.
about that integration piece. And so like finding a specialist to really learn from and like get involved in your body in a new way can help, again, avoid injury, heal the ones you have, break you through to that next step, invite you into a new place. So
And yeah, and actually reverse your aging. I mean, that's, like the name of this podcast is Fountain of Youth. Like with these, here's the thing, like I'm not just talking about, you know, uh, prolonging something that's kind of limping along. I'm talking about, and so are you, like the actual reversal of injury. And because injuries, old injuries never quite die unless you really heal them completely, which most people never do. And so they stay ghosted in your body and rear their heads, like 10, 20, 30 years later. I mean, I met this guy who at a party, and he said, I fell rock climbing in my 20s. And he goes, and then he said something that really chilled me. He said, and I bounced back at the time. And I was like, yeah, that's the problem, because, and here he was in his 50s, and he was just so badly, affected by it. And he didn't know it because he thought he bounced back. And that's the problem, is that people think that when the pain goes away, the problem's gone. And it's not true.
right. Yeah, that's watching bad form for, let's say, ex-football players who,
Mm-hmm.
I love this one. Like, where did you learn how to exercise? Oh, I learned from my football coach who was my math teacher during the day and
Mm-hmm.
when I was 16. And now I'm going to take those same exercises and the way that I did them when I was 16, which I could handle them differently because the effects of them weren't going to show up right away. And I'm going to do them when I'm 40 then,
Yeah,
or 45, and then my body's not going to handle it the same way. So
totally.
holding on to these things and not going back to heal them and to truly sort of get into a new relationship and be able to open up those channels that have been shut down from either trauma or injury or bad form or lack of connection or lack of attunement or unawareness of your alignment yeah, when you want a new relationship with your body, when you're ready, there are people like Erin and I who can help you with that. And that's the point of today's show, is that the fountain of youth is in your body and the
It
connection
is.
to it.
It absolutely is. And so the third piece of the Birch method is assembly, which is kind of a weird word, but when you think about it, tension is like the glue of the universe. Water molecules actually are held together by a kind of tension. And so assembly is like, what is holding you together and how well are you doing at it? So um, the the tension in our body, we need it because it holds us together. But the problem with it is that it's living in places where it has no business being. There's a design for the tension. There's actually a system that I call the core container, and it's for functional, sustained holding in our core, that so that then the tension that's in your IT band and your tensions in your shins and calves and the tensions in your neck and shoulders and lower back, that's not where it lives. Because when tension is where it's not supposed to be, it's corrosive to the design. And when it's where it's supposed to be, then what happens is a lot of flow and a lot of ease and a lot of grace and a lot of and I've had people, just by teaching them their design in terms of tension, it's how to play the game of tension and win, is putting the tension back into the design of the body so that you free up your places, because it is gluing your joints together and it is not pretty. And when you think about like a young family in the beach, let's say 3 generations. So the little kids are, they're just having a great time, just jumping around, and there's so many moving parts that it's stunning. And then their parents walk by and you're like, not so many moving parts. And then their parents walk by and you're like, wow, not a lot of moving parts at all. So what happens in that process we think is normal. And I'm saying when you redistribute the tension into the core container and you train it into there, then it frees up the glue that you've been using to glue the moving parts together, and you don't have that same outcome of fewer moving parts. Moving parts, they're a premium in your body.
Actually saw someone running this morning as we were walking near the beach, and she was young, and I thought, wow, does she have so much tension in her hips and her lower back because they weren't moving and there was no undulation of
Right.
her midsection and her hips. She was holding them really tight. And when I've done races in the past, the difference between women who also have tight hips, tight lower back, they're trying to avoid an injury, or they have an injury that they're compensating for, and I'll see their shoulders moving up and down, right? It's like that up and down motion. And it's like, wow, like just to watch the gait of people and where they hold their tension for sure. And it's a great analogy of like younger versus older, but even younger. Like, and today, the woman I saw she couldn't have been more than in her mid 30s, but she might even been in her 20s.
Wow. Wow. And you know where that's going to go. I mean, where that's going to go. And let me say also that, for women particularly, like childbirth moves things out of their happy place, changes their happy dance, their happy relationships. And so, that's another factor as a woman goes through the arc of her life. Childbirth pregnancy has an effect. And most women completely disregard that anything has actually changed. And one woman described it like, after birth, like she said, I went back to the same house, but the furniture had been rearranged, talking about her body. And it's, so women particularly, their low back and pelvis and hips can be really tight in compensation for things that have happened during childbirth, for example.
Great point. So now if someone is listening to this and they want more information, let's say there's, obviously we want people to work with you, but let's say they can't, for some reason, they're just not physically, maybe not in this country. I have a lot of listeners in other countries, Australia, especially. Shout out to Australia and Canada. And they're like, come to Australia and do a workshop here. And if enough of you tell me that, I will, but I've only had a few of you tell me that. So I need more than a few of you to tell me that.
So it's not easy to get there.
Well, it's fine. I'll make that investment if you're all willing to show up and buy a ticket to the event. So let's talk about the people who aren't going to make it. What can you tell them? What would be like 3 things and it could be one of each point, or it could just be the top 3 for them trying to get more information and start to help themselves use these 3 points to have a better relationship with their body, heal stuff, move stuff, reactivate stuff. What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, I'll just say that I have a bunch of Facebook Live videos that I've done on my Facebook page, which is Erin Burch. And also, they're also cataloged on YouTube. I have a channel, The Burch Method, on YouTube. So there's a lot of information there, actually, a ton. So in terms of attunement, like letting yourself actually pay attention. And it's so funny, our words like actually tell you that attention is a commodity, right? You pay attention. And when you pay attention, you get something back, which is more awareness, more fluency in that language of sensation. So really like letting yourself sink into a sensation. And if it's pain, what I would say is that there's an intense sensation, and then over top of that is the protection from that intense sensation, which actually equals pain. So when you can start to peel apart your response to the intense sensation and the intense sensation itself, it tends to really change the pain experience big time.
Nice. Okay.
And so for alignment, just like starting to, so one really simple thing is many people will stand with their feet pointed out, and they'll stand with their feet not hip width. Now, hip width is not the same thing as pelvis width. Your hip joints are actually in about a few inches. So if you can stand with your feet parallel and hip width, which if you take your sort of fisted hand and put it between your feet, it should be about that width. which is much narrower than most people think of as hip width. And what that does is it starts to stack your feet and your hips so that you're not having to work to hold your feet out further than your hips. So that's really, really big. And I've actually had people's back pain disappear when they did that.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah. And for assembly, I'm going to give a really quick and dirty way to feel the core container. So if you put your hands like an opera singer would, which is like the top hand is sort of clawed and the bottom hand is sort of clawed and they're sort of stuck together. Does that describe it?
Got it.
Okay. And the elbows are out straight. And then if you just kind of pull your hands apart and press the elbows in opposite directions, then what happens is you feel it at the base of your pelvis, you feel it at the base of your ribs, and you feel it between your blades of the shoulders. So if you can hold that, feel all of that holding you together, and then gradually release the hands and try to maintain that connection with that tension in the core container. That's what the feeling is to have your core container engaged.
Nice. I've never had that shown to me that way.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I made it up.
Awesome. Well, that's awesome. Of course, that's why I've never heard of it. Yeah. So if people want to get more information, where should they go?
So it's www.thebirchmethod.com. And the Burch, B-U-R-C-H is Burch. So,
Erin, I know people are going to be very interested. People don't want to be in pain. They want new ways. They want to have hope about being connected to their body. So make sure you check out the Burch. It's thebirchmethod.com,
The
right?
Burch Method, yes.
Thebirchmethod.com. Thank you so much for being on the show. I love having these conversations with people taking a deeper scientific and intuitive approach to our bodies and to our health and our aging. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We could talk all day, I'm sure, but thanks for having me.